Hello guys, in this video I'm going to show you how I bleed the front brake system on my Ducati Multistrada 1260S. For the bleeding process I use a simple DOT4 brake fluid. Any type of DOT4 fluid would do. In a case your brake usage is a bit harder than the usual, you might use a racing brake fluid with a higher wet boiling point. In that case, I suggest to replace it in every year. The workshop manual advises the replacement of the brake fluid in every 3 years, but I usually shorten it to 2 years because I like my bike and I like my braking system. Since you can find hundreds of videos on the web about bleeding a hydraulic brake system, whether it contains ABS or not, so my purpose here is not to show the very details of the process. I simply show how I do it and I add my thoughts. The first step, I put some rag around the brake fluid reservoir to avoid any possible contact between the brake fluid and the painted surfaces. We know that the brake fluid is pretty much corrosive. Then I remove the 2 screws. And the cap and the membrane. I suck out the old brake fluid by a syringe. I put the membrane back for a simple reason that I like to avoid the moisture from the air be absorbed into the brake fluid. Then we fill it with fresh fluid. I usually make 2 holes on the bottle, one for pouring and one for breathing. It's up to the max. Then I put the membrane back. For the bleeding you can use the classical method while pushing the brake lever. I open the bleeding screw up till the lever hits the grip. Then I close the bleeding screw, few pump, open it again, and just repeat it. By pushing the fluid out, don't forget to check the fluid level in the reservoir. Just not run out of the fluid, because then air goes into the system and you need to start the whole process from the beginning. When it's finished, let's remove this pipe and clean all the parts from the brake fluid residue. And usually send the fluid from this hole as well. Then tighten the bleeding screw to a torque of 12 Newton meter. That's it. I advise to use some water to remove all the residues of the brake fluid. Brake cleaner is not effective. Brake fluid dissolves into water, so you will use a simple water. At the end of the process, I use some brake cleaner to clean all the friction area, just to avoid any slipping. But next step is to make the bleeding process on the other side. Procedure is the same. And just to get rid of all the possible air trapped into the system, as a final step, let's bleed the master cylinder. You need a few strokes only, because all the possible air traps are right below the bleeding screw. It's nice and clean, so let's fill up the reservoir up to the maximum level after cleaning the surface, and then the process is finished. Fluid levels at the maximum. Install the cap into the position that the hose for the screw matches, and then tighten the screw. Tightening torque for the cap screws are 0.7 Newton meters. This is quite low, so I use my common sense. Tighten it by hand. I've got a torque wrench, but it's valid from 1.5 Newton meters and will be almost double, so I consider it as done. Well, I got some notes for this whole braking system maintenance according to the Ducati workshop manual. So this bike is equipped with an ABS hydraulic system, and bleeding the brake system should include the bleeding of the ABS hydraulic system. And I was checking the workshop manual, and the only mention for bleeding the ABS hydraulic system was that push the pistons back into its bottom position, and then the possible air traps would go to the brake master cylinder. But don't tell me how, because the ABS hydraulic system is right there between the two cylinders below the airbox. So I did it, and I explained it that why it would be useful to push the pistons back into its bottom position. After that, let's loosen the screws of the caliper and push the pistons back into the bottom position. Why? Because the banjo board here, this is the intake with the brake fluid, is right next to the bleeding screw, while the brake fluid goes down to the pistons. So if we leave it as it is in this position, we can flush it out, but it might need a bit more fluid to make it clean, and it will not be perfectly clean. By pushing the pistons back into the bottom position, it pushes the fluid out of the system. And then, according to the workshop, the bleeding process is just to make an approximately 20 or 30 millimeter stroke on the brake lever, open the bleeding screw and let the old fluid drain down. So it's a kind of gravity bleeding. So I tried it this way, nothing happened. So I supported it with a vacuum pump, nothing happened. So I had to go back to the conventional bleeding method, as pushing the brake, opening the screw, closing the screw, pushing the brake, and so on. But in that way, the first process is to push the pistons out. So there was a factory guy in some forum who told that in a case there is a suspicion of an air trap in the ABS hydraulic system is during the assembly process in the factory, you need to lift up the front section of the bike or the rear section of the bike to bleed out the system, because in that way the bleeding screw should be at a higher position than the ABS hydraulic unit, and the ABS unit is approximately in this height, so you need to lift up the bike significantly, and you need the special tools, special equipment for it. So other vehicles, other bikes have got some software controlled maintenance process for bleeding of the ABS. It makes the ABS pump work without ignition running, driving and so on, but the Ducati has not. So I've checked the diagnosis, and there is only one point that refers to the ABS, but this is related to the IMU system. So there is one point in a case you need to replace the IMU. That's a so-called brain of the life supporting system of the bike, in a case you would not have enough brain to tame the beast. And as for these so-called special functions, it means that you need some expertise to go into the settings, otherwise you can screw up the whole software system of the bike. This is the ABS setting in end-of-line mode. It means that in the factory there is an end-of-line test for all the systems and when you replace the IMU system, the inertial management system, you need to connect it and test it together with the ABS. So this is a software test and hasn't got anything to do with the pump or the operation of the hydraulic system. It means that when you bleed your braking system, you don't have the option to make the ABS work and flush it somehow. This is a so-called hardware key for my previous bike, with which I was able to switch on the pump when I bled the system, and then I was able to flush out the ABS hydraulic system, the hydraulic unit. For some reason, Ducati hasn't got this option. And yeah, frankly speaking, I don't understand why, because it would be a useful feature. So the only advice for me is, after bleeding the system and replacing the brake fluid, go to a dirt road or some slippery area and make the ABS work for both the front and the rear brake. It partially flashes the ABS hydraulic unit, so the old portion of the fluid will be mixed together with the new one. It's not the best solution, but it's the same for the cooling system, for example, because if you replace the coolant, you cannot drain the whole system without dismantling all the cooling system. So it's a kind of design issue, and as for my opinion, it's a room for improvement, guys.